All right. Hello, I'm Charlie Mattingly from Leading Edge Financial Planning. And today I've got Mark Covell with me, one of our newest advisors, just passed the Series 65. We're getting you registered to full up and running so that you can help us and join our team here at Leading Edge. And so, Mark, we're happy to have you.
Welcome from the West Coast, Charlie. Thanks for having me on.
Right on, right on, right on. It's Mark's out in Lake Tahoe, California. Beautiful place, and probably, Mark, the next location of our company get-together. Your house.
Sounds like a plan. Just did the first day snowboarding down Heavenly yesterday, so you're welcome anytime.
That's awesome. But so today we're going to talk a little bit about investing. What investing is like in 2020. Investing, planning. 2020 has been a crazy year. We've had a lot to deal with. COVID-19 and an election, by the way. Probably not quite through the woods just yet either. So, you know, I saw something the other day, Mark, that kind of reminded me of this. And it's been a very emotional year for lots of us, very difficult year, a lot of ups and downs. And there's an analogy that I haven't used very often, you know, to relate from yours, and my flying experience into the financial world, because I think most of them are cheesy. But this one, to me, struck a chord, and it was spatial disorientation. You know, I started thinking about that. I heard something else somebody referred to it on a podcast. And they were a non-pilot, just kind of learning about it, and they were fascinated by it. And I agree, it's fascinating. You know, the fact that you could not know physically whether you're kind of right side up, sideways, straight and level. You know, and I've felt this before, Mark. I know you have. And basically, just for the non-pilots out there, it's when your vestibular system, is that right, Mark? Your inner ear gets a little tumbled, and you literally cannot tell if you're sitting upright, sideways, or whatever, and a lot of pilots have died from that on a serious note. But I know you've experienced that, Mark. And what do you think about that? It's pretty fascinating.
Sure. You know, I think anybody who's flown fighter aircraft in some bad weather may have experienced the leans, and that's a very common, I guess, phenomenon. And in the Navy and Marine Corps, they train to spatial disorientation, spatial-D, just probably like you saw, you've gotten some of that in the Air Force as well. But my recollection was there was three main categories. There was recognize, which is the most common, and it's important to recognize that, hey, I am not sensing something correctly. The more insidious is an unrecognized spatial-D, and a lot of times that ends in some type of controlled flight into terrain. And when we were talking earlier, I shared with you one of the common accident investigations from years ago in the Navy was nighttime, bad weather, guys getting launched off the front end of the carrier. That acceleration gets a G illusion that your nose is pitching up. And if you are not referencing your instruments, or your instruments were to black out from the shock of that cat shot, your natural reaction is my nose is pitching up, and you push the stick forward. And guys have crashed in the water, as you said, unfortunately, from that that unrecognized disorientation. The last is incapacitated. I don't know. Have you ever G-locked or been close to in the F-16, Charlie?
I've never G-locked. We've what do they call that? Ridden the gray tunnel quite a bit, where your vision kind of comes down. But yeah, I mean, the incapacitating. I don't know. Do you remember the giant hand effect? Remember that? I don't know if they talked to you about that, but it's probably.
I recall that one.
Yeah, the giant hand effect, where you literally cannot move the stick, you know, or yoke, depending on what you're flying, because the sensations you're getting from your body, you know, you just can't believe that they're not correct. And in fact, a lot of private pilots, I believe, are involved in fatal accidents because they feel like they're straight and level, but they're actually in a turn. And when you're in a turn, the nose goes down, and so they feel like they're straight and level, so they pull back on the yoke. But in reality, they're over rotating, pulling down, and they get into this death spiral. Terrible, terrible thing. But it's crazy. And again, 2020, from the investing, financial, it's almost felt like we've all been involved in some kind of spatial disorientation, like you said, recognized, unrecognized, because a lot of times those emotions that we experience literally take control of our decision making, or we don't discern, like you said, the emotional versus the factual. You know, in the airplane, we can't discern the seat of our pants and what we're feeling versus what the instruments are telling us. So it's amazingly similar, and I think there's a lot to learn there. But Mark, like you talked about, you know, we were taught steps. You know, recognize that you're in this situation. You know, and that's just understanding yourself. Know yourself. Know what kind of investor you are. Know that, you know, where you get your information is important. You know, confirm the situation. Talk to people about it. You know, don't. And sometimes we feel like we kind of know what's going on, and you know, when we're in these, Mark, one thing we hear a lot from investors is when we're in these downturns, you know, we get this feedback like, well, we know it's going to continue to go down. Well, we know this is going to continue to happen. Well, really, we don't know. You know what I mean? And that's the difficult part about it. But finally, you know, the last one is recover. You know, recognize, confirm, recover. And we recover in the airplane by using our instruments. You know, you've got to look at those instruments and you've got to believe them that they're correct. In fact, we have two of them for that reason, you know, a primary and a backup. But what do you think?
You got to trust those instruments more than you trust the seat of your pants. So you're getting conflicting information, and you have to trust that what you've been trained is the superior information, right, Charlie?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's really a fascinating phenomenon, a physiological phenomenon. But what do you think? You know, Mark, like we have the instruments in the airplane. We got the attitude indicator, we got the airspeed, vertical or VVI, whatever. What are some of those, you know, equivalents in the personal finance investing world that you think about?
Well, I appreciate you asking me this, because I asked you this question earlier. And I was like, I really love this topic. It was something I, you know, spent a little bit of time doing aviation safety in the Marine Corps with, and it was not, you know, fascinating when you're like, hey, this applies to the investing world. When you don't, you know, the world doesn't look right anymore. So, and it happened on a dime. And I said, you're right, Charlie, what do you trust? And I agreed with you initially. The first thing that's most tangible and relevant to each of us as individuals is, you know, what does our cash reserve system look like? Because that probably, if we're conservative and we're leaving that in a money market or some, you know, liquid accessible things, probably hasn't changed much. And that's going to give us, you know, some breathing room to understand, okay, we've got some capacity to deal with the situation. You know, we can wind our watch. We got some time to deal with this. We got other safety nets as well, whether it's insurance that we've you know, previously purchased. Not that we're going to execute those, but these are all part of, you know, our defense and depth safety strategy, if you will. And I thought, you know, I'll let you take the ball and run with this one. But the financial history, I thought that was fantastic. Secondary instrument to reference of, look at all the events that have happened in our country's history. You know, civil wars, world wars, Great Depressions, all of these things, we've always recovered, and we trust in those. And I thought that was great perspective, Charlie, and I won't steal your thunder anymore. So. Yeah,
no, man, that's one of my favorite. I'm just kind of a fan. It's so amazing. And it's not predictive. You know, sometimes people say, well, that was then, this is now. And some people say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, you know, and that's kind of funny, but I think it's also true in that when we go back and look at, like, you know, right in the heart of the COVID pandemic, we're still in it, you know, of course it's November 2020, but right when it started, I should say, we immediately looked to history, like what can we refer to? What can we fall back on? Have we been here before? And sure enough, you know, 1918, I think, was the great flu pandemic that went across the world and in the US, and unfortunately a lot of people died from that. So there were some things to learn from that. You know, perspective, again, it's not everything, but man, we get to go back into history and look and see how things reacted and what we can use and fall back on for this particular circumstance. They're not exactly the same, but I really like to go back and use that for me. And to me, it's kind of like training, if you will. You know, we can't possibly live through all the different decades of, you know, the 60s. That was a difficult decade, if people remember that from their history books. But But it reminds me in flying, when we go out and fly these sorties and we do simulators, you and I, and we practice emergencies, you know, we've got to experience that, even though it wasn't in combat at that time. You got to see it, you got to feel it, you got to really be part of it, so that when the real thing happened, you know, there was less uncertainty, there was less surprise, less fear, and less anxiety. We knew what to do. We had that to fall back on.
Sure.
So,
You had greater confidence. You trained to it. So we don't always train to it in our financial investing of experiencing it. It occurs in real time. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of our process, Mark. You know, at Leading Edge, we believe in that training. In fact, we will show people, hey, this is your portfolio. This is what would have happened in 2008. And we don't show percentages, because sometimes percentages, they don't really register. We show dollars. Hey, how would you feel if your, you know, $1 million portfolio went down to 500,000 or 600,000? You know, and let's talk about that, you know, so that we've been there before. We don't ever want that to happen again, of course. But anyway, we do think that's important. The last thing I'll say, Mark, because you and I could talk on this one forever, but I think that I also fall back on the fact when stock markets go down for whatever reason, I always come back to the fact that I'm invested in companies. I'm invested in the companies that we all know and love and use on a day-to-day basis. And just because, you know, GDP wasn't the way we thought it would be, or whatever thing caused the recession, you know, these companies are still great companies. The management is still the same. You know, the products are still quality. So, you know, that's what I go back to. Hey, the prices have temporarily declined. They'll come back up when economic conditions recover, because they're still great companies. And now we invest in a lot of them. We don't invest in just a few. So we invest in hundreds and thousands of them. So that helps us to weather storms as well. But that helps me a lot too, Mark.
That's great perspective. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks. We hope this has been helpful. Please reach out anytime at our website is leadingedgeplanning.com. Mark is at mark@leadingedgeplanning.com, charlie@leadingedgeplanning.com. So shoot us an email. And I think, Mark, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, all that good stuff too. So people can find us there however they find people on Facebook and LinkedIn.
It was always a pleasure to talk with you about interesting flying and investing subjects, Charlie. Thanks again for having me.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. And hope it's useful. Thank you.